She asked to be his wife for one night, a widowed woman and a cowboy's. Martha Ellis had lived in Willow Creek for as long as she could remember. The town was small, quiet, and surrounded by miles of golden fields that stretched to the horizon. Children ran along dirt roads, their laughter echoing across the open spaces, and neighbors waved to one another as they tended their gardens or drove by in dusty trucks. It was the kind of place where everyone knew everyone else's business, yet there was a sense of comfort in that closeness. Martha had loved it once, and she still did, even though life had changed in ways she never imagined. She had been married to her high school sweetheart, Henry, a gentle man who had loved horses and storytelling and had a laugh that could fill a room. Their marriage had been quiet but happy, built on simple joys, Sunday picnics by the river, late-night talks under the stars, and shared dreams of raising a family. But all of that ended 5 years ago when Henry died unexpectedly from an illness that had crept into their lives without warning. The grief had been unbearable. Martha had stayed in her house, surrounded by memories, and watched the years slip by, one lonely day at a time. Her days now were predictable. She taught at the small local school, grading papers and helping students with reading and math. She walked the town streets after class, sometimes stopping at the general store for supplies or lingering at the cafe for a cup of coffee. The townspeople were kind and supportive, but loneliness clung to her like a shadow. She had friends, certainly, but there was no one to share her evenings with. No one to tell her small triumphs or to comfort her in quiet moments of sadness.
On one particularly warm spring evening, the town buzzed with excitement.
The county fair had come to Willow Creek, bringing with it the smell of popcorn, the sound of laughter, and the bright colors of rides and stalls. Martha had debated going. She didn't usually attend fairs. They reminded her too much of happier days with Henry, when they would stroll hand in hand, sampling caramel apples and watching children's eyes light up with wonder. But something in her heart told her she needed to step out of her quiet routine. Maybe it was the promise of seeing familiar faces, or simply the desire to feel the world around her. As she walked through the fair, she felt a mixture of nostalgia and cautious excitement. Children ran past her, their laughter ringing in her ears. A group of teenagers were playing ring toss, shouting and cheering each other on. Stalls offered homemade pies, colorful ribbons, and delicate crafts made by the townsfolk. Martha lingered at a booth selling handmade quilts, her fingers brushing over the soft fabrics. She smiled faintly, remembering Henry's love for cozy quilts, how he would pull her close on chilly nights and whisper about the comfort they brought. It was near the edge of the fair, where the rodeo ring had been set up for an evening show, that she saw him. Jack Callahan. He was leaning against the wooden fence, tall and broad-shouldered, with sun-bleached hair and a face tanned from long hours in the sun. He had the quiet confidence of someone who knew the land and his own strength, moving with ease and assurance. There was a calm in his presence, but also a spark, a hint of mischief, in the corner of his mouth. He was well known in Willow Creek, not for being flashy or boastful, but for being a man who lived simply, cared for his horses, and followed his own path without letting anyone else's expectations weigh him down. Martha felt an unusual flutter in her chest. She hadn't felt anything like it in years. It wasn't love, not yet, but it was curiosity, intrigue, and a sense of life that had been absent for too long. She hesitated, almost afraid to approach him, but she found herself walking closer, drawn by something she couldn't name. Jack noticed her before she spoke. "Evening," he said, tipping his hat slightly. His voice was deep, steady, and surprisingly gentle. "Enjoying the fair?" Martha nodded, finding herself smiling despite the nervousness in her chest.
I am... It's been a long time since I came.
Her voice was soft, almost a whisper. "You don't seem like the fair type," he said with a hint of amusement.
Too quiet? She laughed lightly, a sound that surprised even her. Maybe.
Or maybe I'm just cautious these days. Jack studied her for a moment, his expression thoughtful. "Cautious is good. Keeps you safe." Their conversation was simple, but it felt different from the usual small talk she exchanged with townspeople. He didn't ask about the weather or the crops or gossip. He asked about her life, her thoughts, her dreams. There was a kindness in his attention, an honesty in the way he listened that made her feel seen after so many years of invisibility. As the fair continued around them, Martha and Jack walked along the edge of the rodeo ring, watching the cowboys and cowgirls preparing for their events. Horses stamped their hooves, riders adjusted their hats, and the audience buzzed with anticipation. Martha found herself laughing at Jack's dry humor and feeling a lightness she hadn't felt in years. She realized how much she had missed simple companionship, someone to share a laugh with, someone who didn't judge her sadness or pity her loneliness. By the time the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, Martha felt a strange mix of excitement and apprehension. She didn't know what this connection meant or where it might lead. All she knew was that for the first time in a long time, she felt a spark of life she thought had been lost forever. Jack, for his part, felt it too. He wasn't the type to chase after people or force connections, but there was something about Martha's quiet strength and gentle presence that intrigued him. She wasn't asking for the world. She was simply present. And he found that presence both comforting and challenging in a way he hadn't expected. As the crowd began to thin, Martha realized she didn't want the night to end. The fair, the laughter, the smells of food, and the warmth of the evening, all of it felt like a temporary escape from the heaviness of her life. Jack noticed her lingering, and he smiled knowingly.
"You don't have to go just yet," he said. "The fair will be here for a little while longer."
"Why don't we watch the next event together?" Martha hesitated, then nodded. They found a spot near the fence, watching as riders guided their horses through daring jumps and tricky maneuvers. The energy of the rodeo filled the night air, but the quiet moments between events, the shared smiles, the exchanged stories, the laughter, felt more important than the spectacle itself. In that moment, Martha understood something she hadn't in years. Life, even after loss, could still surprise her.
There could still be joy, connection, and hope. It didn't erase the pain of the past, but it reminded her that her heart was capable of feeling again.
And for Jack, it was a reminder that not every connection had to be complicated or fleeting. Sometimes, simple presence and shared moments were enough to awaken something long dormant, a sense of belonging, of warmth, of possibility. As the evening wound down and the last stalls began to close, Martha and Jack stood near the edge of the fairgrounds. The stars had begun to appear in the darkening sky, twinkling like tiny reminders of hope. Martha felt a courage she hadn't known she possessed, a gentle urging from within.
"Thank you," she said softly, her eyes meeting his.
"For walking with me tonight. For everything."
Jack tipped his hat again, a small smile playing on his lips.
"It's been my pleasure. I haven't had a night like this in a long time either."
And in that simple exchange, both of them understood that this encounter, unexpected, quiet, and strangely significant, was only the beginning. A spark had been lit, a connection formed, and neither of them knew yet where it would lead. But for the first time in a long while, Martha didn't feel alone. And Jack, for the first time in a long while, felt that life could be quietly extraordinary, even in the simplest of moments. The next morning, Martha woke to the gentle light of the sun spilling through her bedroom window. The quiet hum of Willow Creek was familiar, almost comforting, but her thoughts were far from ordinary. She couldn't stop thinking about Jack Callahan, the tall, quiet cowboy she had met at the fair. His smile, his calm presence, the way he listened as if every word she said mattered. It had been decades since she felt such a connection, even a fleeting one, and the memory made her chest tighten in a mix of excitement and anxiety. Her house, usually a place of quiet routine, now felt unusually empty. The aroma of brewing coffee in the kitchen brought a small smile to her lips, but it couldn't fully erase the echo of last night's laughter and conversation. She found herself pacing the kitchen, thinking about the simplicity and honesty of Jack's presence. It was strange, almost impossible to feel such curiosity about someone she had only just met. Yet, there it was, a spark that she couldn't ignore, a pull toward something unfamiliar yet comforting. Martha tried to focus on her usual tasks, grading papers, preparing lessons, checking on the garden, but her mind kept wandering back to the rodeo, to the way Jack's eyes crinkled when he smiled, and the quiet, unspoken understanding they had shared during their walk through the fairgrounds. She knew it was unusual to feel so drawn to a stranger, but Jack was no ordinary stranger. There was a strength in him, a groundedness that felt rare, and Martha found herself wishing the day would move faster so she could see him again. Meanwhile, Jack was already up before dawn, tending to the horses on his ranch. The morning air was crisp and smelled of earth and hay. He moved with the practiced ease of a man who had spent a lifetime outdoors, brushing down his horses, checking the fences, and preparing for the day ahead. But even as he worked, his thoughts kept returning to Martha. There was something about her quiet presence that had unsettled him in the best way possible. He wasn't used to feeling drawn to anyone, not after years of solitude and focusing on the ranch, but her laughter and sincerity lingered in his mind, persistent and warm. Jack had never been one to chase relationships. He respected freedom, solitude, and simplicity in life. But there was a gentle tug in his heart, a curiosity about Martha that he couldn't easily explain. He found himself replaying the moments from the fair, the way she had laughed, how her eyes sparkled when she spoke, and how naturally she moved, despite the weight of her past. Something told him that this encounter was different, that perhaps life had presented him with a chance for connection he hadn't realized he needed. That evening, the town's daily rhythm carried on as usual. Farmers returned from the fields, children ran home from school, and the cafe buzzed with the familiar chatter of neighbors exchanging stories. Martha, feeling a mix of anticipation and nervousness, decided to take a walk along the edge of town. She had no particular destination, only the need to feel alive, to step outside the quiet walls of her home, and perhaps to clear her mind. As she walked past the pasture near the rodeo grounds, she saw him, Jack, standing near the fence brushing down a horse with careful practiced movements. His posture was relaxed yet commanding, a combination that always made Martha's stomach flutter. She hesitated, unsure if she should approach, but the pull of curiosity was too strong to resist. She walked closer, her steps tentative but determined. Jack looked up and smiled when he saw her. "Martha," he greeted, his voice carrying the warmth and calm that had first drawn her in. "I didn't expect to see you here. I thought I'd take a walk," she said softly, her hands twisting nervously. "Needed some fresh air." He nodded, watching her with careful eyes. "Fresh air is good. Helps clear the mind." There was a pause, a gentle moment of silence, where neither seemed eager to speak, but both seemed unwilling to let the moment end. Finally, Martha found the courage to ask, her voice a little uncertain. I was wondering, would you help me?" Jack raised an eyebrow, curious. "Help you with what?" She swallowed hard, feeling the heat rise to her cheeks. It's my home. There's a small problem. Flooding from the creek. I'm worried about my garden and some of the livestock." "I don't know how to fix it on my own." Jack's expression softened immediately. There was no hesitation, no question of whether he would help. "Show me," he said simply. "We'll figure it out together." They walked to her home, Martha explaining the situation along the way. The creek had overflowed slightly after a few days of heavy rain, threatening her small vegetable garden and the pens she used for her chickens and goats. Jack listened carefully, asking questions about water levels and the layout of her property, but never questioning her ability. He treated her with respect, as someone capable, not fragile, which made Martha feel a warmth she hadn't felt in years. Together, they worked to reinforce the small barriers around the creek, moving sandbags and adjusting fencing. Jack's presence was steady and reassuring, his hands skilled and confident. Martha followed his instructions, impressed by his knowledge and calm demeanor. Despite the hard work, there was laughter between them, small jokes, shared smiles, and a gentle teasing that made the day feel lighter than it should have. As the sun began to set, painting the sky with shades of pink and orange, they stood back and looked at the work they had done. The creek was contained, the livestock safe, and the garden protected. Martha felt a sense of relief and gratitude wash over her. I don't know what I would have done without you, she admitted, her voice soft. Jack shrugged modestly.
It's nothing, just lending a hand.
Martha hesitated, then took a deep breath. There was a boldness in her heart that surprised her.
Ah! Jack, would you be my husband for one night?
The words hung in the air between them, delicate but full of meaning. She wasn't asking for marriage in the traditional sense, just for a night of companionship, a chance to feel connection and warmth without commitment. It was unusual, almost absurd, but Martha felt a strange courage in her vulnerability. Jack blinked, caught off guard. He studied her for a moment, reading her expression carefully. Then a slow smile curved his lips. One night? He repeated, his voice a mixture of amusement and curiosity.
You're serious? Martha nodded, her cheeks warm. Yes.
Just one night. I want to feel what it's like to have someone beside me.
Someone who isn't judging, who isn't asking for more than I can give. Just one night.
Jack considered her words.
He was not a man who made promises lightly, but there was honesty in Martha's eyes that spoke to him. It wasn't desperation or neediness. It was a simple human desire for connection, something he could understand. Finally, he nodded. All right, he said quietly. One night, relief and a strange exhilaration washed over Martha. She felt lighter, as if a weight she hadn't realized she was carrying had lifted. They shared a quiet laugh, acknowledging the peculiarity of the situation, but neither seemed embarrassed. There was a trust forming, fragile but real, between them. As they walked back toward the house, the evening air cool and scented with wildflowers, Martha realized that this unusual request had brought something unexpected. A spark of life, a moment of courage, and the beginning of a bond she hadn't anticipated. Jack, too, felt the stirrings of something he hadn't allowed himself to feel in a long time, a connection that didn't need to be explained, only experienced. The town of Willow Creek continued its quiet evening rhythm, unaware of the small, profound moment that had taken place between two people who had lost, wandered, and yet somehow found each other. The stars began to appear in the sky, twinkling like tiny reminders that life could surprise even the most cautious hearts. And for Martha and Jack, the night ahead was no longer just a fleeting possibility.
It was a chance to explore companionship, trust, and the subtle joys of simply being with someone who saw them for who they were. The evening settled softly over Willow Creek, wrapping the small town in a quiet calm that contrasted with the day's lively energy.
Martha sat on the porch of her modest home, her hands wrapped around a warm cup of tea. The memory of the day lingered vividly. The laughter, the shared work, and the unexpected closeness with Jack. Her heart raced in a way it hadn't in years, a mixture of nervousness, anticipation, and a strange comfort that came from knowing he was nearby.
Jack arrived just as the sky began to darken, the last light of sunset glimmering across the fields.
He carried himself with the easy confidence of a man used to working with his hands, but there was also a gentleness in his movements as he approached. He greeted Martha with a quiet nod, the corners of his lips turning up in that familiar, reassuring smile.
"Evening," he said simply. "Hope you're ready."
Martha laughed softly, a little nervously.
"I think so," she replied. "I'm ready for tonight."
They stepped inside, and the warmth of the house felt different than it usually did. Normally, Martha's home was filled with quiet solitude, a comforting stillness that had accompanied her since Henry's passing. But tonight, with Jack there, it felt alive in a way it hadn't in years. The air seemed charged with possibility, a silent acknowledgement of the unusual agreement they had made. They began with simple conversation, talking about the day and sharing memories of their lives. Martha spoke of Henry, the love they had shared and the quiet grief that had lingered since his passing. Jack listened attentively, never interrupting, never judging. When he shared his own story, about growing up on a ranch, losing someone he cared for, and the solitude he had chosen, Martha realized how much courage it took for him to open up.
There was a pause between them, a moment heavy with unspoken emotion.
Martha's eyes searched Jack's, and she saw the depth of his experiences reflected there, the loneliness, the hard choices, and the resilience that had shaped him. For the first time in a long while, she felt understood, seen in a way that went beyond simple conversation or casual interaction. Jack reached out, gently placing his hand over hers. The touch was light, respectful, and reassuring. "Martha," he said softly, "I don't know where this night will lead, but I want you to know I'll be here. Completely. No expectations, no judgment, just
Death to the turncoat. Us. Martha felt tears prick the corners of her eyes.
She nodded, a lump forming in her throat. I want to feel alive again," she admitted. "Even if it's just for tonight. I want to remember what it's like to connect with someone, to be seen." Jack squeezed her hand gently. "Then let's do just that," he said. They spent the evening talking, laughing softly, and sharing quiet moments of companionship. There was an ease between them, a rhythm that didn't require words but was built on understanding and presence. Martha found herself telling Jack things she had never shared with anyone, her fears, her regrets, and the small joys she had clung to in her quiet life. He listened, sometimes nodding, sometimes simply sitting in thoughtful silence, his presence alone comforting her more than words could. As the night deepened, they moved closer, their conversation shifting to dreams and hopes for the future. Martha admitted she sometimes feared being alone forever, that the quiet days she had grown used to were slowly eroding her sense of self. Jack shared his own worries about loneliness, the way he had built walls around himself to avoid pain, but found that those walls often made him feel empty. In that small, softly lit room, the two of them realized something profound. They were not seeking a permanent commitment tonight. They were seeking connection. Honest, human connection that allowed them to feel safe, understood, and alive. It was a fragile understanding, delicate and precious, and both of them knew it. The night passed slowly, each moment marked by small gestures of care and respect. Jack fetched blankets when Martha shivered, and she laughed softly at his careful attention. They shared food and tea, telling stories of childhood adventures and mishaps that left them both laughing until their sides ached. The simplicity of these moments, the shared warmth, the soft laughter, the quiet understanding, felt more meaningful than anything either had experienced in years. At one point, Martha looked at Jack and asked softly, "Do you ever regret living so quietly, choosing solitude over connection?" "Sometimes," he admitted, "but solitude has its place too. It teaches you about yourself, but nights like this remind me the connection matters, that life isn't meant to be lived alone." Martha nodded, her heart swelling with a mix of gratitude and emotion.
I feel the same way.
"I thought I'd lost that feeling of being alive, of feeling seen. Tonight reminds me it's still possible." They continued to talk into the night, sharing small confessions and gentle silences. There was a rhythm to their companionship, a quiet understanding that didn't require grand gestures or dramatic declarations. Each smile, each shared glance, each gentle touch spoke volumes. They didn't need more than the presence of one another to feel whole, if only for these few hours. As midnight approached, a soft quiet settled over the house. Martha realized that the fear and anticipation she had felt earlier had melted into something warmer, a sense of safety and trust she hadn't known she could feel again. Jack seemed to share that understanding, his expression calm yet reflective, as if he too was learning something about life he had forgotten.
Finally, Martha spoke, her voice barely above a whisper.
"Jack, thank you for tonight. Oh, for everything. I didn't know I needed this, but I do." Jack reached out, brushing a stray strand of hair from her face. "You didn't have to know," he said gently. "Sometimes you just have to allow yourself to feel. Tonight was about that, about allowing ourselves to be human. That's enough." There was no awkwardness, no rush. The night was theirs, a space free from judgment and expectation. They didn't need to define their connection beyond this shared moment. Martha felt a lightness she hadn't known in years, a warmth in her chest that came from the simple act of being seen, being understood, and being cared for. Jack, too, felt a shift within himself. He realized that life wasn't just about solitude or self-reliance. Connection! Genuine, honest connection was a gift, and he had been given it tonight. He had shared a part of himself he rarely showed, and it had been met with understanding, not judgment. That alone was enough to make the night unforgettable. Hours passed, and sleep eventually claimed them, not as strangers, but as two souls who had found solace in one another. They didn't know what tomorrow would bring, or how the world outside would react to their unusual arrangement. But in that night they had discovered something enduring, the power of presence, of companionship, and of trust. When morning light crept through the windows, neither felt the need to speak immediately. They simply shared the quiet of the morning, savoring the rare comfort of having someone beside them who understood without needing explanation. The night had been fleeting, temporary in theory, but it had left a mark on both of them, something gentle, lasting, and transformative. Martha realized she no longer feared the possibility of connection. She knew the night was temporary, but she also knew it had reminded her that life was still full of possibility, still capable of bringing warmth and joy, even after years of sorrow. Jack felt similarly. His solitude no longer felt like a shield but a choice, one he could balance with moments of human connection. They both understood that life would return to its routines, that the town would continue its quiet rhythm, and that the extraordinary moments were rare. But the night had reminded them of something essential, that even brief connections could be profound, that trust and understanding could be formed in hours, and that hearts could heal through small, honest gestures of companionship. And so, the turning point had come, not through grand declarations or dramatic events, but through the quiet intimacy of shared presence, the courage to be vulnerable and the willingness to allow another person into one's life, even for a single night. It was a night neither would forget, a night that changed how they saw themselves, each other, and the possibilities that still lay ahead. The morning after their night together, Willow Creek awoke to the gentle glow of sunlight spilling over the fields. Birds chirped softly, and the distant sound of farm animals stirred in the quiet town. But for Martha, the calm of the morning was complicated. She sat at her kitchen table, staring at the empty chair across from her, feeling a strange mix of warmth and uncertainty. The night she had spent with Jack lingered in her mind like a delicate memory she didn't want to let go of, yet she also knew the reality of life was waiting outside her door. Her thoughts were interrupted by the familiar routine of the day. Students would arrive at school soon, lessons needed preparation, and the small town demanded attention. Martha moved slowly, her heart still heavy with emotion. She couldn't stop thinking about Jack, his gentle smile, his quiet presence, and the way he had made her feel seen and understood. But with that thought came fear. Fear that the night had been fleeting, a brief escape from reality, and that she might have misread the meaning behind it. Meanwhile, Jack returned to his ranch at the edge of town. The morning air was crisp and smelled of earth and hay, but the usual comfort of solitude felt different now. The quietness of the ranch, which he had always found peaceful, now carried a subtle ache. He thought about Martha constantly, her laughter, the soft way she had shared her feelings, and the courage it had taken to ask for companionship. He couldn't deny that something had changed inside him. The night they had shared had opened a door he hadn't realized was there, a longing for connection he had carefully avoided for years. As the day progressed, both Martha and Jack found themselves distracted by memories of the night. Martha tried to focus on teaching, helping students with reading and math and keeping her routine, but her mind kept drifting back to Jack's gentle reassurances, the warmth of his hand in hers, and the quiet moments of understanding they had shared. She realized that while the night had been temporary by agreement, its impact was lasting. She couldn't shake the feeling that something had begun, something neither of them could ignore. Jack, on the other hand, struggled with a different kind of tension. The ranch demanded his attention, and the work of caring for horses and maintaining fences kept him busy. But no matter how much he focused on his tasks, his thoughts returned to Martha.
He remembered the vulnerability in her eyes, the way she had laughed despite years of sorrow, and the courage she had shown in asking for something so unusual yet honest. Jack knew that their night together had meant more than just a fleeting moment. It had awakened feelings he hadn't allowed himself to experience in years. The town, of course, was never truly silent.
Willow Creek was small and news traveled quickly. By the next day, a few neighbors had noticed Jack and Martha spending time together, and subtle whispers began to circulate.
Some people were curious, others skeptical, and a few even disapproved. Martha felt the tension immediately.
She had always valued privacy and discretion, and the idea that her personal life might become fodder for gossip made her uneasy. Jack, too, was aware of the subtle glances and quiet murmurs of townspeople.
He wasn't bothered by the curiosity as much as he was concerned for Martha. He knew she was sensitive to the opinions of others, and he didn't want her to feel judged or pressured. Yet he also understood that they couldn't completely avoid the outside world. Their unusual arrangement, though innocent and consensual, was bound to attract attention in a small town like Willow Creek. As the days passed, Martha and Jack continued to meet, sometimes casually at the edge of town, sometimes working together on small projects around her property. Each encounter was filled with the same gentle companionship they had discovered the night before. Yet, beneath the warmth, both felt the subtle tension of societal expectations and personal uncertainty. Martha worried that her heart might be growing attached to something temporary, while Jack struggled with the fear that allowing himself to feel might make him vulnerable in ways he had long avoided. One afternoon, as they worked together to repair a fence damaged by the recent flood, Martha paused and looked at Jack with a mix of curiosity and concern. "Do you ever think about what other people will say?" she asked softly, her hands resting on the wooden rails.
Jack considered her question carefully. "Sometimes," he admitted, "but I don't live for what others think. Still, I understand your concern."
People talk, and in a town like this, it can feel heavy. Martha nodded, appreciating his honesty. I don't want the whispers or judgments to change what we have. I don't want it to end before it even begins." Jack leaned on the fence beside her, his expression thoughtful.
"Then we focus on what matters. Us, not the rest."
His words were simple, but they carried a weight of understanding and reassurance. Despite their shared determination, the subtle pressures of the town began to creep in. Friends asked questions, neighbors offered unsolicited advice, and casual greetings carried hidden curiosity. Martha found herself withdrawing at times, afraid of being misunderstood or judged. Jack noticed and gently encouraged her, reminding her that their connection was theirs alone, not something to be dictated by others.
Yet even as they faced external pressures, there were internal struggles to contend with.
Martha wrestled with feelings of guilt and uncertainty. She knew she had entered the arrangement for companionship, but she couldn't deny that her heart was beginning to hope for something more. She feared that admitting her growing feelings would complicate their agreement or risk losing the trust they had built. Jack, too, faced an internal battle. He was accustomed to independence and solitude, and the deepening connection with Martha challenged everything he had carefully maintained. He felt a longing he hadn't experienced in years, yet he worried that embracing it fully could lead to disappointment or heartache. The vulnerability required to allow love, or even the beginnings of it, was daunting, but he also realized that avoiding it entirely might leave him feeling emptier than before. One evening, as the sun dipped low over the horizon, casting the fields in warm golden light, Martha and Jack sat together on the porch steps of her home. The air was filled with the soft chirping of crickets and the faint rustle of leaves in the breeze. Martha turned to Jack, her expression tinged with both hope and worry. "Jack, do you think we're making a mistake?" she asked quietly.
"I know we agreed it was just for one night, but I don't know if I can pretend it didn't mean more to me." Jack reached out, placing his hand over hers. "Martha, I don't think it was a mistake. What we shared was real, even if it was temporary. But I understand what you mean."
"It's complicated." She looked into his eyes, searching for reassurance. "I'm afraid," she admitted. "Afraid of losing this. Afraid of getting hurt."
And afraid of what others might think. Jack squeezed her hand gently.
I'm afraid too, he said. But maybe the fear is worth it.
Maybe this connection, however unusual, is something we can't ignore. We can't control what others think, and we can't predict how the future will unfold.
But we could choose to be honest with ourselves and with each other.
For the first time since the night they had shared, she felt that honesty might guide them through the uncertainty. The external pressures and internal fears were still present, but they were no longer insurmountable.
Together, they had the courage to face them, one step at a time. In the following days, Martha and Jack continued to navigate their evolving relationship.
They worked on her property, shared meals, and spent quiet evenings talking or simply enjoying each other's presence. The whispers of the town persisted, but they learned to focus on the connection they shared rather than the opinions of others. Each moment together reinforced the trust and understanding that had begun on that extraordinary night. They also discovered that companionship required patience and empathy. Martha learned to communicate her fears without retreating, and Jack learned to acknowledge his feelings without shutting them away. Both realized that connection was not always simple, but it was profoundly meaningful when nurtured with honesty, care, and respect.
Despite the challenges, there were moments of joy and laughter that reminded them why the bond was worth pursuing.
A shared meal at the edge of the creek, a sudden downpour that left them drenched but laughing, a quiet evening watching the stars. Each small moment strengthened the foundation of trust and affection. The struggles and consequences of societal expectations and personal fear became part of their story, not barriers, but opportunities to grow closer. And slowly, gently, they began to realize that the night they had shared was only the beginning. What started as a temporary arrangement had evolved into something more, a fragile, beautiful connection that neither had anticipated but both now cherished. It was a connection that required courage, patience, and understanding, and it was slowly reshaping their lives, teaching them that even after loss, loneliness, and fear, hearts could still find one another. The following weeks in Willow Creek were quiet but full of subtle change. The air seemed lighter, the days a little brighter, and the small town continued its usual rhythm, largely unaware of the growing bond between Martha and Jack. But for them, everything had shifted. Their unusual arrangement, the night of companionship they had shared, had grown into something deeper. What had begun as a simple, fleeting connection had become a steady, nurturing presence in their lives. Martha found herself waking each morning with a sense of anticipation she hadn't felt in years. The sunlight spilling into her room seemed warmer, the birdsong more vibrant, and even the chores around her home felt lighter when she knew Jack might be there. She had come to understand that her feelings for him were no longer just a fleeting curiosity. They had become something real, something that filled the quiet spaces of her heart. Jack, too, noticed a change in himself. The ranch, once his solitary refuge, now felt complete when Martha was around. Her laughter echoed across the fields, her gentle voice brought comfort, and her presence reminded him that connection didn't diminish independence. It enhanced it. He no longer saw companionship as a risk or vulnerability. Instead, he saw it as a choice, a gift that enriched life rather than constrained it.
Their days were filled with simple routines that became treasured rituals. They worked together in the garden, repaired fences, and tended to the animals with easy familiarity.
Sometimes they sat on the porch, sharing tea or a quiet meal, and spoke of nothing and everything. The small moments, like Jack helping Martha lift a heavy basket of vegetables or Martha brushing the dust off one of his horses, carried more meaning than grand gestures ever could. Yet life wasn't without its subtle challenges. The town continued its quiet observation, and occasional whispers reached their ears. Some neighbors were curious, others skeptical, and a few questioned the propriety of their relationship. But Martha and Jack had learned to navigate these pressures together. They didn't let gossip dictate their choices or their feelings. Instead, they focused on the trust, understanding, and respect they had built over weeks of shared moments. One afternoon, as the sun dipped low over the fields, casting a warm golden light, Martha and Jack sat on a worn wooden bench beneath a large oak tree. The animals grazed nearby, the air smelled faintly of hay and earth, and the distant hum of Willow Creek carried softly on the breeze. Martha turned to Jack, her expression thoughtful but calm. "Jack," she said quietly, Do you ever think about what's next for us? I mean, beyond just these days and nights together? Jack paused, considering her words carefully.
I do, he admitted. I've thought about it more than I expected.
I didn't plan on feeling this way, but I can't deny that what we have matters. You matter! Martha felt warmth spread through her chest, a gentle reassurance that she hadn't felt in years. You matter too, she said softly.
I was afraid at first that it was just for one night, but it's so much more than that now. I can't imagine my days without you.
Jack reached out and took her hand, his grip firm yet gentle. Then we figure it out together, he said.
No rush, no pressure, just honesty, patience, and choosing each other every day.
The simplicity of his words carried a weight that Martha could feel deep in her heart. For the first time since Henry's passing, she felt that life wasn't just about coping with loss or filling empty hours.
Life was about connection, trust, and the courage to let someone in, even after years of solitude. And Jack had given her that courage, not with grand declarations, but with presence, respect, and unwavering attention.
As the weeks turned into months, their bond strengthened. They shared quiet mornings in the garden, laughter-filled afternoons tending to animals, and evenings beneath the stars, speaking of hopes, dreams, and the future. The small town, though still whispering at times, gradually began to accept their companionship, recognizing the sincerity and respect in their relationship. One evening, as they watched the sun set behind the distant hills, Martha rested her head on Jack's shoulder.
I never thought I'd feel like this again, she admitted. I thought the emptiness would always be there. But now it feels like there's hope. Like life can still surprise me in the best ways. Jack wrapped his arm around her, pulling her gently closer. Life has a way of surprising us, he said softly. Sometimes the things we think we've lost come back to us in ways we never expect. And sometimes they're even better than before.
Martha smiled, feeling a sense of peace she hadn't known in years. She realized that the night she had asked Jack to be her husband for one night had been more than a fleeting desire for companionship. It had been a step toward healing, toward rediscovering the courage to feel again, and toward embracing life with an open heart. Jack felt it too. That night had been a turning point, a moment of vulnerability that had allowed him to experience connection without fear or reservation. It had shown him that love and companionship didn't have to be complicated or demanding. They could be simple, honest, and deeply fulfilling. As time passed, their relationship settled into a gentle rhythm. They didn't need grand gestures or declarations to prove their feelings. Each act of care, each shared smile, each quiet evening together was a testament to the bond they had formed. They learned to communicate openly, support each other's fears and dreams, and navigate the pressures of life with mutual respect and patience. One afternoon, as they walked along the creek that had once threatened Martha's garden, she stopped and looked at Jack. The water reflected the sunlight, sparkling like tiny diamonds across the surface.
Do you remember the first time we worked here? She asked, smiling. Jack nodded, his eyes soft with memory.
I do. We were trying to stop the flood from ruining your garden.
And we laughed the whole time, even though it was hard work. Martha laughed softly.
I never imagined then that it would lead to this. To us.
Jack reached out, gently brushing her hair back from her face.
Neither did I.
But I'm grateful for it. For every step, every moment.
You've changed my life, Martha, in ways I didn't even know I needed.
Martha felt tears prick the corners of her eyes.
And you've changed mine, she whispered. Well.
I feel alive again, Jack. I feel hope, joy, and I feel love.
Even if it's quiet, even if it's simple, it's real. And that's all that matters.
They stood together in silence for a moment, watching the water flow gently past them. There was no need for words. The shared understanding, the connection they had nurtured, and the trust they had built spoke louder than any declaration ever could. As evening fell and the first stars appeared in the sky, Martha and Jack returned to her home.
The quiet warmth of the house, once a place of solitude, now felt alive with shared memories, laughter, and the promise of continued companionship. They sat together on the porch, hands entwined, and let the world fade away for a while, content in the knowledge that they had found something rare and precious in one another.
Life in Willow Creek continued, with its familiar routines and quiet rhythms.
But for Martha and Jack, every day now carried a sense of meaning and fulfillment that had been missing for years. They had learned that connection, trust, and love didn't have to be grand or complicated. They could be simple, honest, and profoundly transformative. And in that simplicity, they found their happiness. Not in dramatic gestures or fleeting passion, but in the steady, nurturing presence of each other's hearts. Martha had asked for a night, and in return she had found healing, companionship, and the quiet, enduring love she hadn't thought possible. Jack, too, had discovered that life's richest moments often came not from solitude, but from allowing someone to truly see you and to be seen in return. Together they faced the future with courage, hope, and an unwavering bond. And as the stars twinkled above Willow Creek, the quiet town seemed to reflect the subtle joy of two hearts that had chosen each other, not for a single night, but for the days, months, and years to come. In the end, Martha and Jack realized that life's most meaningful connections often arrive unexpectedly, sometimes in the simplest of moments. What began as a request for companionship for one night had grown into something far more profound, a shared journey of healing, trust, and enduring love. And as they looked toward the horizon, hand in hand, they knew that together they could face whatever came next, strengthened by the bond they had built and the love that had quietly, yet fully, taken root in their hearts.